Welcome to ArtBeat, Canada's Art Pulse. I'm your host, Katie. Today, we're featuring Daniella Williams, an artist who navigates the intimate realms of voyeurism and personal spaces through her art. Daniella reveals how her acute awareness of her surroundings weaves into her narrative, painting a vivid picture of emotions and perceptions. As we journey into her world, Daniella opens up about the nuances of being a female artist today, the importance of figurative painting, and her pursuit of creative freedom. From investigating new themes to embracing imperfections, tune in for an engaging look into Daniella's artistic development and her outlook on the future. Daniella, hi.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Welcome, and I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
I would like to start in current times. I want to hear about the new series you're working on. It's incredibly fascinating. And yeah, I want to hear you talk about what has inspired you to explore these themes like voyeurism and the intricacies of personal spaces.
Yeah. So for me, my work has always been a kind of catharsis of my own experiences in life, my own processes, my own anxieties, and things like that. I've always been very aware of the world around me. And with that comes a very heightened awareness of myself. So I've always felt that it's both my weakness, but also my biggest strength to kind of have this really keen awareness of the things that are happening around me. And it's a beautiful thing, but it can also be, something that creates almost too much of an awareness of the things going around you at all times. And I think this is a human experience that everybody can relate to. So I would say within the last 2 years, this has been a theme that I've been exploring more in terms of how I can depict this experience or put this experience turn it into kind of like an image or, just like a shared painting of this kind of discomfort that we feel when we are so sensitive to the world around us, but also to our own internal experiences. So with that, I kind of began starting to just become more aware of the things around me and try to snap like pictures. And so I've always just kind of been aware of what's around me and tried to take a lot of photos. And then from there, I'll turn them into references for my paintings.
How do emotions and being perceived play into your artistic narrative?
So very much so, as this is something that I really experience on a daily basis. So I think that being perceived is something that is very prevalent today, especially with like social media, with being a young woman, and also being an artist, like I'm putting my work on display for the world to draw an idea from, to draw a narrative from. So with that, it's just always been this experience that I've kind of wanted to pick apart and understand, because although it can be something that is uncomfortable, it's also something that we're all very drawn to. I think that we're all kind of really intrigued and obsessed with this idea of having a peek into the private sphere, having a peek into other people's lives, celebrity culture. Also just like, I almost like always assume that like everybody feels this way, but I'm very kind of fascinated with like the human psyche and, like how interpersonal relationships work and the like, intricacies of this. So I think just trying to paint that experience for people has been something that I've really been trying to tackle.
You just earlier mentioned about taking photos. Do you paint from photographs?
I do. Yes. It's actually a really important element to my work.
Yes. Can you elaborate more on like how taking photographs and painting from photographs shapes your artistic vision?
So photography for me is actually kind of a really integral part of my process and my paintings. It's kind of like where the paintings begin is, I would say, in the reference photo and the photographs that I'm taking, because in taking a photo, a lot of the times we're creating a scene. So this becomes kind of like, it's like a form of like set design in my eyes, or a preliminary process of a painting. So I'm kind of just always keeping my eye out for something that might intrigue me. But usually that means I'm being aware of the dynamic between like people that I'm seeing on the street, family members, friends, that kind of thing. And I don't always ask people if I can take a photo with them. Actually, you know what? Let me backtrack. So there's kind of two ways that I go about taking photos for my references. Sometimes I'm taking photos of people that I just see on the street, people that I see on the subway, on the beach, things like that. And those images are always kind of very fleeting. They're very organic. I really like to capture people in movement. Because, when we don't know that we're being perceived or that we're taking a photo of, that's us at our most authentic. So that can kind of capture a facial expression or an authenticity that maybe you might not catch from, say like a model or somebody that you've posed. So there's that element of photography, which I really love. And those ones usually are more of like these kinds of like scenes that I'll take of people outside and just going about their day. And then on the flip side of that, I have a process that I'll do when I'm creating a new series where I'll usually ask a group of friends or people that I'm close to sit for me as models. And what I'll actually do with them is I don't paint them from life. I'll choose a space, or perhaps like come to their home, or invite them to my home, or invite them to my studio. And then what I always do is I create a list of interview questions for my sitter. And I take them through these interview questions. And then from there, we kind of infuse their answers into the activity they might be taking part in, or, just like the overall like feel of the photograph. Another thing that I often do is I will give the sitter kind of like a little acting sheet almost, like different cues for them to act out and scenarios to play out, especially when there's more than one person. And that really helps kind of guide the actions and the different emotions that come up for the people who are sitting for these photographs. So so there's those two kinds of aspects that come into the photography part. And then from there, I will carefully sift through the photos and, I'm looking for a very specific kind of quality in these photos. I want them to be very cinematic. I look for them to be, for there to be a really nice composition and lighting. When those elements come together and I know that I love the photo as it is, then that's how it's going to translate into a strong painting. I'm really inspired by photographers like Nan Golding, Wolfgang Tillmans, Carrie Mae Weems, Latoya Ruby, Fezier. So a lot of different photographers I take influence from, but overall it's this kind of cinematic casualness that they create that I try to bring into my photographs and paintings.
Do you notice a difference between the in the moment photos that you take, the candid photos, versus what seems to be a bit more, I'll use the word contrived, And does that translate differently onto the canvas between those two different types of photos?
Yeah, it definitely does. I would say that for the images that I'm taking that are more fleeting, so of strangers or people passing by, I would say once it's turned into a painting, the message or like the feeling is kind of something that you have to find a little bit more. You have to try and kind of struggle with it. You look for the different elements of what's going on and, you know, why is this woman over here and why is this man over here? You know, why is this person bending down versus touching their arm and the expressions in the face? Because, you know, I don't have as much control over it. So it's kind of like things are just unfolding and being uncovered more organically, which is really nice. And I always kind of have an idea in the back of my mind of what type of an image I want to get. But after that, you know, I'm not always in control of how it turns out. And so much of figurative painting is about how it's going to be interpreted by the viewer, the story that's going to unfold for the viewer, and also, you know, really trying to think about who are these people to each other? Who is this person in relation to their surroundings? There's always like some type of story that comes with any type of figurative painting. And I think that's why I'm so drawn to figurative painting in general, is just the narrative that goes along with it.
And with that narrative and human dynamics, how do you convey those aspects from the photograph onto the canvas? Is it difficult? Is it something that you try to perfect?
Painting is a medium that we don't always have very much control over. I think that part of the thing that I love in paintings is when there's kind of like accidental moments and imperfections within it. So I think like I'm actually working towards this a lot in my painting, but I know that like the paintings that I'm very drawn to are the ones that seem like slightly unfinished or aren't kind of struggling to find perfection. I think that those are the things that make painting really interesting. But also when we're painting the figure, when we're reinterpreting an expression, you can get really stuck in making it perfect, especially when you want it to resemble somebody in case maybe you know them. So there's that. It's tricky to always kind of resemble people perfectly, but also keep in mind that you want to keep this sense of like looseness and stuff. So I think it's kind of like a fine balance that I work with. I want the expression to come across, but I also allow for there to be some room in terms of how the piece comes out.
And in your opinion, what does photography capture that painting cannot, and vice versa?
I think that what painting captures that photography doesn't is it can capture a lot more movement a lot of the time. Photography is often a static moment. You're capturing a moment in time. But I think that something that painting can do is it can almost bring an image back to life, because there's kind of like that human touch to it. Like there's that what we call like painterly quality to something, you know? So it kind of brings back that humanity in terms of like somebody was here, somebody created this. In terms of what photography carries that painting doesn't. I mean, oftentimes when I look at photography, like photographs that I really love, I'm almost like I get like jealous almost, because I'm like, oh, you know, like they captured that moment so perfectly. And like, even in my own photographs, you know, like I'll be like, oh man, this is so beautiful. But like sometimes it doesn't look the exact same when you paint it. But that's kind of something that you have to like let go of. So like these like especially when you're working from reference and when you're doing like when you're a figurative painter, it's never like you're trying to replicate the reference or replicate the image. It's almost like this whole new art form. It's kind of like, if you were like doing like a song and then you made a song and then you had somebody like come on to the song with you, like now it's a whole new song. So it's kind of this new added layer onto like the original work of art.
How do you use your art to tell stories, especially when they're related to private lives and relationships?
Usually where the narrative comes from and where like the message that I'm trying to get across in my paintings comes from is something that I'm going through at the time. So maybe that sounds a little bit like narcissistic, but I think that a lot of artists, like a lot of beautiful art, I think is made because it's for yourself, and then hopefully like it resonates with other people. So usually it's kind of something that's based around my own experience that I have been thinking about or struggling with. So like these ideas around like perception and the act of seeing and the act of being seen came from me going through several years, a period of my life where I felt just keenly aware of like being perceived in the world and trying to like control this experience, but also like let go of it. And like, I'm also somebody who's very spiritual and I really love just looking and like just learning about myself a lot. So I think that painting became this form of working through that. And from there, I kind of try to think about like, okay, like how can these become like stories, like how can I turn this into a scene, whether it's something that I've seen just out and about in my regular life, or if it's something that, a kind of story that I'm crafting. So when I get people together and create these kind of, what's the word I could use? Like a script almost. But the most recent one that I just created was called Domesticity. And this was a series that I did about the tensions that arise in like the domestic space. So I got together this group of friends and I gave them all a set of scenarios to act out with each other. But the one thing that I kind of said to them was that they all live in this home together and it's not clear whether they're all romantic, perhaps it's kind of this large, like polyamorous relationship, or whether they're friends, whether they're roommates that are like sleeping together, whether they're married, whether they're divorced. Like I wanted the dynamic to be very ambiguous, but for it to be clear that there was something going on between them. So, I was creating these images where maybe one of them would be sitting at one end of the couch and the other at another end of the couch, or one person's in the bathroom and like, getting ready for the day and the other person's leaving. So there's always this kind of understanding that they're inhabiting a space together. Their gazes never meet. They never touch one another. It's warm, but it's also cold. So there's like that, they're sharing a space, but they're also kind of distant from one another. And this narrative kind of came from my own experiences with like love and like relationships and stuff, like, and like my upbringing and just like seeing how relationships are always kind of playing out in this really like pessimistic kind of, I don't know. I just always kind of feel like being somebody who grew up from parents that didn't end up staying together made me so keenly aware of like how fragile relationships can be, how you can like grow apart and come together and grow apart and come together. And I think it's really beautiful, but also very complex. So I wanted to create that type of story. And it's still something that I'm interested in, but now my ideas have kind of expanded more to be about just like the collective experience of like these intricacies of being and existing in the world and kind of like my gaze. So like the female gaze on the the other.
And so, speaking of the female gaze and experiencing life in the world as a woman, as a female in the art world, what unique challenges have you faced and how did you navigate them?
Well, when I first started out painting, this was something that I was really aware of, was being a female in the art world. It's interesting because a lot of the paintings that I wanted to make were kind of like the paintings that were more so dominated from like a certain type of artist. So like a lot of the artists that I used to be like, that I still look up to, were white male artists. Some of the like kind of classic artists, you know. Now my inspiration comes from like a very wide range of artists, but I look to a lot of the techniques from painters like John Singer Sargent and like Edward Hopper. And I, wanted to understand how I could see more people like myself being a biracial woman in this space of like classical figurative painting. So I started to think about how I could kind of almost reimagine or recreate a space of classical figurative painting, but from the female gaze, from the gaze of somebody who's biracial and has a very wide range of friends. Like like a lot of the friends I have are part of the queer community and they're all creatives. So and I have a lot of female identifying friends as well. So I started to kind of band together that group of people that I was around and express my feelings about this and bring them into my paintings and things like that. So yeah, there's that aspect. But another thing that I kind of worked through with being a woman in the art world was being on social media and how we're consumed as kind of almost like a commodity. We're all kind of like putting on a pretty face and curating like this beautiful life for ourselves. And it's this really kind of interesting experience that we're only kind of going through now. Like this is the first time in history that women are dealing with this new lens of being a woman, like out in the public. So also exploring those ideas around like social media and being open with ourselves, but also feeling like private.
Absolutely. So have you noticed a shift in recent years of how female artists are represented and recognized then?
Definitely. I would say there has been a big shift. Like I'm seeing like a lot more female artists that are coming into the scene that are, making like really exciting things. So I think that it's way more like kind of on everybody's radar, but I think it's just going to keep continuing and keep growing bigger and bigger, which is like so exciting. But also like I think that has a long way to go in terms of Canadian art, or not necessarily Canadian art, but like the art scene in Toronto, especially. Like I know that there's a lot of amazing emerging and established artists on the scene in New York that like I really look up to, like Jenna Gribben, Jordan Castile, Eliza Niesenbaum are like just to name a few. And those are some female artists that I think are just absolutely trailblazing, especially in the realm of figurative painting. And I'd really like to see that kind of like fire and like kind of like honestly, like they're painting like men, which is like the one thing that I love about them. And I think it's like somewhere I want to get as a painter. It's just like, like they just have like this like ballsiness to them and they just paint so confidently. And I know that they're also very influenced by classical male painters, because that's where the realm of figure painting began. But they're just like totally reshaping it. And I just think it's so exciting. So I would love to eventually be one of those women at the forefront of, kind of figurative painting for women to kind of look up to.
Do you feel that your gender influences the way your art is perceived or received?
Yes, I do. And that's because I think a lot of the time when you're a visible minority, that you're kind of sometimes like pigeonholed into having to paint about or make art about like that experience or about one kind of thing. And I think that's very important. But I also think that we kind of forget sometimes that like being a woman, being queer, a BIPOC person always infuses its way into your work, regardless of whether or not it's explicit. So I think that with that being said, it finds its way into my work. It changes the way it's perceived, but it just depends on like the viewer, it's a positive thing sometimes. It's just another like lens to look through the work at sometimes, because if I paint a naked woman or a naked man, it's a different thing than if a man were to paint a naked woman or a naked man. So, sometimes it's in my benefit, but not always, it just depends.
And how has the perception of others, because we're talking a lot about being perceived, how has the perception of others influenced your art? And do you actively think about how viewers will perceive your work as you create it?
My paintings are almost like my process of not caring. So everybody, I think when you're an artist, like every artist that I've ever spoken to is the most self-critical about their work. And I've heard people say that you're not an artist unless you almost dislike everything you make but it just makes you improve, So, I wouldn't say like I'm necessarily like shaped by like what other people might think, but I'm very hard on myself, which is probably my projection of like what the world probably thinks of me. So like in a way it probably does, but like not in this like kind of very concrete way that I'm thinking of. And and in painting that experience for other people, like this, like painting like intimacy and voyeurism, I'm trying to kind of create it into something that is very like mundane, and it becomes very like, I want it to be like this norm to understand and see into people's like private lives and private spheres, and to understand that like this vast range of emotions that we all have are like so human. And in that, like I'm working through my own acceptance of that too.
So it sounds like your art has been a form of self-therapy or self-discovery in some ways.
Totally. Yes, it is. When I first started out painting, a lot of my paintings the subject was the female nude and the female body. And that had a lot to do with me working through my own experiences of like having a body, being in a woman's body, the implications that come with that, topics around like eating disorder, sex, identity, those kinds of things that I think so many women struggle with and work through and like alchemize was a big topic of my painting at first. But, I don't paint about that as much anymore, because it's almost like I like processed it.
Right.
I processed my experiences and my struggles with those things. And then like, it was time to like explore something else. It felt like.
How do you navigate the emotional highs and lows of being an artist?
I always feel that being an artist and having a practice is kind of like a lifestyle, and like kind of like hygiene that you have to keep up with yourself. So I don't feel like I am like creating my best unless like I also am feeling good and like feeling like I have like the space for it. I do a lot of yoga. I love to like talk. I'm like very close with my family and stuff. And I like journal a lot and like those types of things. And I honestly, like, I used to feel like those things were like secondary, but I actually very recently, within like the last like year or so, came to a point with myself where I was like, these are a part of my practice as an artist. And I have to kind of almost see like these like self-care practices as like a part of my painting, because if they go, then I can't show up to be like the best painter that I can be. So I think that like those things really help me kind of like feel more like open to different inspiration and work through like the highs and lows of just like being like a highly sensitive person.
And how did you get started with oil and figurative painting?
It's actually kind of a funny story. The first time I ever remember wanting to paint the figure was when I watched Titanic. When I was like 5 or 6, 7 years old, something like that, like very young. And I remember like that scene where like Jack paints or like draws Rose.
Yes.
And I just remember being like, wow. And I was already I was always a very like artistic kid, but I remember like seeing that moment specifically and being like, oh my gosh, that is amazing. Like, that's so cool that you could do that. And I remember I would start to like draw like the figure. And from there, it actually went into like being interested in fashion design. So what happened with that was I began kind of drawing the figure. Like I would draw like women's bodies and just like silhouettes and stuff. And then I would put clothes on them and I would design these really beautiful gowns and just like cute little like tops and like skirts and things like that. And I realized eventually, after years of creating all these different designs and sketches, that it was actually the drawing aspect that I really loved about it, not necessarily the designing aspect. I still love fashion. I always say that if I wasn't in art, I'd probably be working in like fashion or something. But yeah, I just started to realize that I really loved the drawing aspect of it. So I started out with drawing, and then once I went to, I think when I started high school, I started painting. Like I was just always taking like art classes, and I was in a painting class. But in terms of like the figure, like, I don't know, it's not even like I was like introduced to it in like school or anything like that. It was just always what I wanted to draw. It was always what I wanted to paint. And my drawings as early as like childhood were always like of people's faces, you know, taking an image of something off the internet that I really liked and trying to like replicate it. And I don't know, I think it was just like the lifelike quality that I really liked about it. I think there's something really satisfying in trying to like replicate a resemblance to somebody, especially when I was younger. Now I've kind of let go of the minute details and like resembling figures and portraiture and stuff like that. But when I was younger, I think it was like really kind of like calming to just like sit and like focus on something and try to like perfect it. And you really have to do that when you're trying to nail like an eye or like a smile or things like that.
Can you walk us through your creative process from concept or photograph up until the point that you start painting on the canvas?
Yes. So it starts kind of this idea of like where I want to go with a painting series. And then depending on the series, I'll either just begin taking photos. So I'll go out into the world and I'll start taking a lot of photos, or I will organize a photo shoot or kind of, you know, this scripted scene with people that I know. And then from there, I take the photos and I always run them through Photoshop. So sometimes Photoshop has an element, finds its way into my work as well, because when you are taking lots of different images all the time, especially when they're like scenes of people that were caught off guard, there'll be elements of one image that you really like and elements of another image that you really like. And something that's really cool about Photoshop is that we can almost like create this scene a lot of the time. So that's not always something I do, but more often lately. I've been doing that because I really like getting these images of like lots of people in one space and playing with proportions and stuff like that. Like sometimes like skewing proportions is really interesting. Like not always needing it to feel like it's like exactly accurate to scale can be like really interesting for the eye. So I'll do things like that. I'll run the image through Photoshop and make sure that I get this like image that I'm really happy with at first. And then if there was an interview process that was paired with the photos that I took, then I take some time to really go through those questions and the responses that the people gave me. And I always try to bring those ideas like into the painting and just meditate and think on who this person is and what their story is and what is happening with the dynamic of the people or the person with their environment as I'm going through it. And usually that will find its way into the title of the piece. So most of the time when there's an interview process, and part of the response from the interviewee or the interviewer, which one is the correct one?
Interviewee.
Interviewee will be a portion of the title. So that's always nice.
That's like fascinating.
Like I have this one painting and it's titled, I think the title is Some Days I Feel Confident and Other Days I Feel Stoic. And it was a friend of mine who I sat down with and I took some photos of her and I interviewed her and I asked her, what does it mean to you to be a woman, navigating a space and like taking up space and also being an artist. And she comes across as like a very confident person. So I was like, where does this sense of confidence come through? Like, you always seem so sure of yourself. And she said something along the lines of like, some days I feel confident, but other days I feel very stoic. And I thought that was really nice.
I want to switch topics here and have your perspective on the Canadian art scene, if we can. So I'm curious, how do you perceive the current art scene, especially relative to figurative painting?
I think that I would love to see more of it. I think there's a few artists that are focusing on this, and I think it's so exciting. But a lot of them are, in like the States, and I think that it's Canada's time to kind of start bringing that dedication to artwork. And there are so many artists in Canada that are doing this, but I think it would be really wonderful to start seeing it kind of come up to a larger scale. But I take a lot of different classes in Toronto to kind of like improve my technique. So I take classes at like the Toronto School of Art and the School of Realist Art. It's in like North York. And so those are a lot of artists that I'm around on a daily basis or weekly basis, however many times a week I'll go to these classes that are all focused on like figuration and bringing back these classical forms of painting. And that's like so exciting to see. So I think that there's a lot of interest for it and there's a lot of people doing it. But I think that right now, contemporary art more leans to like abstract and like the performance. So we see a lot more of that, I love abstract work as well. So that's exciting, but would love to see more figurative work. Yeah. And also there's a lot more gallery shows that I've been noticing more in Toronto specifically lately. I think that the pandemic took a big hit on galleries and it's so exciting seeing these shows that are, popping up, and there's a lot of markets and fairs and open calls and things like that. So it's just like so exciting. And I think that Toronto is going to have this really amazing revival in terms of the focus on artists and Canadian art.
Looking forward, what new themes or techniques are you excited to start exploring?
I really want to start working on just like having a lot more creative freedom and not being so tied up in making like a perfect painting. I like I said at the beginning of our conversation, the things that I love most about paintings that I look to for inspiration are like the imperfections and the kind of things that just felt like you just left it how it was. So I think I'm really trying to infuse those qualities into my work in terms of the way that they're painted, but also the ideas. Like I'm really interested in these ideas of like, just like letting go of perfection lately and kind of like self-acceptance and things like that. And yeah, so it's still kind of in the realm of having like private spaces and looking into the psyche and understanding the relationship dynamics between the people that inhabit my life. Yeah, more so I think just like creating this body of work that people can relate to around letting go of perfection, kind of going with the flow of things, keeping the things there that seem like mistakes because they're actually what make us beautiful and they're actually what make paintings beautiful. So yeah, I think kind of leaning into that more on.
So Daniella, can you tell us a bit more about who or what inspires your paintings or your style or your technique?
Yes. So I'm definitely always doing like investigating and looking at works of like predecessors who I really draw inspiration from. But there's, I would say, 3 contemporary artists that I think 3 or 4 contemporary artists who are really kind of exciting me right now and who I'm constantly checking in with their work to draw inspiration from, because I think that they're doing a beautiful job at telling stories and creating a narrative for the viewer to extract from. The first one would be an American artist named Eric Fischl. He's one of my all-time favorite painters. I think just the way that he paints is kind of masterful. Like he's just so confident in the way that he paints and very expressive and kind of very like Hopper-esque. Like his paintings are kind of very much like Edward Hopper's. So there's his work. And then Eliza Nissenbaum, who is a Mexican-American artist. Jordan Castile, who's an American artist that is depicting the people in the neighborhoods within Harlem. And her work is very captivating. It's very colorful. It has like kind of like a very, like a lot of these kind of like drawing aspects to it, but they're very, very personal and they tell a lot of stories, and it's like everyday people that she's painting. And I think that's so exciting to kind of see these like mundane people who we wouldn't normally see captured in paintings or on like gallery walls now have these like this moment to shine. And then lastly, Anna Gribben, another American artist who she's a queer artist who paints her partner as her muse and really explores voyeurism. And it's just, her pieces are fascinating. If you haven't seen her work, I very highly... You haven't? Okay, yeah. She actually kind of rose to fame through Instagram. So she has a lot of her pieces on Instagram, but she's just very, very intimate paintings of her partner and her child and her personal, just like home life. And I love that. I mean, I wish my partner would let me paint him, but he's like very, he's much more like, he works in finance. So he's just like, I don't know if I'm going to let you paint me nude, but yeah, so those are just a few artists of many that I think really inform my work. And, along with many artists from, way back when, but these are a few contemporary artists that I really love and really draw inspiration from.
Daniella, what's next for you?
So for me, I would say right now what I'm focusing on is kind of starting to get my work more in the gallery space. And I've been working on a new series in the last little while. So I'm focusing on developing this new series. It's focusing on voyeurism, the private space, all those kinds of topics that we've been speaking about. And I just want to get it out into the world more and more. I've had the pleasure of being able to exhibit my work in a few different places around Toronto. I want to get my work out there more and more. I think that I'm trying to just progress as an artist. Had this last year was a big year for me in terms of gaining more confidence as an artist and understanding my identity as an artist in the world today. Yeah, I think it looks like that for me, these next few steps, and just making as many connections as I can make and growing my technique, perhaps showing internationally. I'm also really been eager to be a part of a lot more residencies. Took part in a residency at the New York Academy of Art this past summer, which was amazing. And my only complaint about it was that it wasn't long enough. I wish it lasted longer. So I would really like to do some more things like that. And then also I'm eager to potentially get my MFA and maybe do my master's and just enhance my sense of professionalism amongst peers who are also excited about figurative painting, just topics in painting.
And Daniella, where can everyone find your work?
So I am on all the social media platforms. I'm on Instagram and my handle is Daniella Williams Art. I'm on TikTok, and on TikTok my handle is Daniella CW. And then you can also find my work on my website, which is www.daniellawilliamsart.com. And on all of my platforms, I'll be keeping everybody up to date with upcoming exhibitions. I have an exhibition coming up in March for Women's History Month, which will take place at Cry Baby Gallery. And then, hopefully some more shows as the months progress. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you, Daniella. Thanks for coming on and sharing your story with us. It's been a pleasure.
Of course. I'd be happy to come back anytime.
We will definitely do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on ArtBeat, where the stories of Canadian art come to life. Follow us on Instagram at ArtBeat Podcast for exclusive content and previews of what's to come. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to stay updated with our journey through the world of Canadian art. Enjoyed the episode? Leave a review or recommend us to a fellow art enthusiast. Together, let's keep the conversation going and deepen our connection to the diverse world of Canadian art. See you next time.